Hello and welcome back to this damn idealistic crusade. This video will be the final installment in my series detailing my ever-growing Hardy Boys collection. This particular video is going to cover the various crossovers with the Nancy Drew sister book series. There's actually far more than most people realize, and when you really dig into it, several series actually. So this video will detail some of the crossovers that were done during the Wanderer printed era of the Hardy Boys Digest books, along with the attempt to sort of cash in on the craze started by the Choose Your Own Adventure books. So there are a series of Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew joint adventures where it is literally following the Choose Your Own Adventure style. But primarily we're going to focus on the SuperMysteries series, which ran for about 10 years from 1988 to 1998, which consists of 36 volumes, and I was just able to finally complete that collection. So that will be detailed here. And that's really the primary focus, but we'll also look at the attempt to restart the Super Mystery series much later on in the 2000s. So with that being said, let's go off to the book table. So here we are with the first of the real combination books that feature both the signature characters and franchises of the traditional characters. So bringing together the Hardy Boys with Nancy Drew for the first time in an actual published book form, really. You have the 2-volume Super Sleuth series, which was 1981 and 1984 respectively, and these are basically, as you can tell from the covers, they draw from the first versions of the digest books, and they basically take, I think it's 7 individual short stories, but it's basically a short story compilation that involves both sets of characters from each individual book series and bringing them together. These are actually quite rare, and I just have the first one. I still have never even seen a physical copy of the second one, just seen pictures online, but it features the same type of cover and design and is, of course, just volume 2. It does still include original illustrations because this is still early on in the Wanderer days of the digest. There was also a additional volume in this type of design, and it was known as the Campfire Stories. So it was another short story compilation. It's also quite rare to find. I've never actually seen one outside of website pictures. But so technically there are 3 books from this time period that brings all the characters together, but there are 2 Super Sleuths and 1 entitled The Campfire Stories. Now, next up is the Nancy Drew and Hardy Boys Be a Detective series, and this is literally a choose-your-own-adventure style book featuring the characters, and was done, obviously, to cash in on the success of the choose-your-own-adventure books throughout the 1980s. It seemed every publisher that had a children's or young readers division tried their own hand at that and had various names, but it was all basically a choose-your-own-adventure style book where you have to flip pages depending on which answer you chose. And the best of them, feature really well-written storylines that have multiple endings and varying grades of endings, in terms of having the best possible ending, having a decent ending, encouraging the reader to go back and choose better to get the best ending, and of course, bad endings, which I always found entertaining. The best books would generally be, the bad ending would be as bad as possible, usually involving like the actual characters' deaths, which are always the most striking. Show you the rear there. And the cute gag about these is there's an opening letter to the reader, which is signed, Franklin W. Dixon and Carolyn Keene, which are, of course, the published authors. But, of course, all these were written by ghostwriters. As you see at the bottom, you have the page indicators because, of course, this is a literal choose-your-own-adventure. And let me get back to that. it does feature internal illustrations, which is great. So both of these, they're still under the Wanderer imprint. So technically, if you're going for a complete digest collection of either the Hardy Boys or Nancy Drew, you really do have to include these, even though they are offshoots. But there are at least several more volumes of these Be Your Own Detective stories. So there were 6 in all, and I have 4 of them. So these are volumes 2, 4, and 6 to go along with volume 1, as you just saw. They did change up the design for the final 2. This is in the same design as that one random Hardy Boys Digest, book 83, the Swamp Monster, where it randomly switches to a different cover type that was never used again. Well, it did get used one more time on the last 2 books of the Be Your Own Detective series. And basically, these were printed 1984 and 1985, and they were apparently going to do more. Apparently, there was going to be a 7th and an 8th book, but the series got canceled, I presume, to low sales. These are very uncommon. They rarely turn up, and I've been able to find these after just, finding odd used volumes in used bookstores just mixed in with all the other books. So I try to get them anytime I find them, and I would like to get the other 2 to complete the set. These are fun, but again, they are just choose your own adventure style books, and to make any complete digest collection, you would have to include these as well. Show you the rears, and again, you can tell they did change up the design on the last 2 books. Sort of the exact same layout. You can see the choose your own adventure elements are right there. I'll show you the last one. They didn't really change the interior, of course, so it's exactly the same. Now, on some of these, you can tell the pages are a little prone to browning, which, if you're looking at digests, you already know they kind of are going to do that most likely by this point in time with their age. It just seemingly depends on what printing run you had or the condition has been kept in, whether it has decided to brown or not. But then some books like the digest have that really bright white paper stock that seems to retain its luster after all these years. So here we come to what most people are going to be aware of, the Nancy Drew Hardy Boys SuperMysteries series, which was started by Archway in 1988 and ran for about 10 years, ending in 1998 with the final 36th volume being published. So it is a 36-volume series, and I've seen it often described as sort of an offshoot of the Case Files and the Nancy Drew Files, which were the Archway print runs and Archway series designed for the older, more mature readers. You do get some of those elements, but I would argue these are sort of their own thing. I don't really think it's fair to call them, directly Case Files stories. They are a bit darker, obviously. Basically, you have the characters working, what is seemingly a case of their own, and they always meet up somehow, and then all of their investigations converge, and it's interesting seeing the characters interact. But I would say that these books are sort of in between the Case Files and the digests in terms of the overall storylines, but maybe leaning more towards the Case Files because they are a bit darker than your average digest. But they're basically their own thing. They're not specifically Case Files, they're not specifically digest, so it's basically like another series. And what's interesting about these, they have really dried up on the used market, so it is now increasingly difficult if you're trying to complete a collection. And I never really thought I would. I had a couple volumes, and I could never seem to find the ones that I was needing. And then recently I found some more and got closer and then finally completed the run. So I'll be able to go through all 36 volumes in this video. And you can see how the covers and story titles and everything will update over the 10-year period. So, of course, they start out and they look exceptionally 80s. So these are the first volumes starting in 1988. And I've got them all in order, and they all have very attention grabbing but simplistic titles, very much in keeping with what you see in a lot of the case files and the matching Nancy Drew Files books. And again, the covers usually have a nice bit of color to them. They are a bit thicker because they have more characters to deal with. So these are printed much more like your average 1980s adult thriller paperback. They seem much more like a standard paperback novel from that time period. Just to give you an idea of what these look like on the inside. It always stuck out. It's interesting to me how they did try to sell these as legitimate novels. They do have these nice spines, which match for the most part, even though the color changes up. And then the back will give you the basic idea, but again, the gag is, Nancy Drew will be investigating some mystery. Meanwhile, Frank and Joe Hardy are investigating something else. So all of the rear covers do that, where it describes the plot of what would ostensibly be one mystery story, and then meanwhile, the second one. And then, of course, they'll all meet up at some point in the book and go from there and realizes their cases are tied together. So here's what I meant about the spines matching up pretty well. Again, all different colors, but I do appreciate that they took the time to actually make sure they would go together on a bookshelf, which is something that they didn't always stick to with these book series. They did change the cover style eventually because it was printed. The series did run for 10 years, but for the most part, they kept to this design. Sadly, they didn't do cover taglines like they did for the case files and some of the Nancy Drew files, but again, the titles are fun enough and sound like great B-80s action films anyway, so I might as well, since I'm here, give them the old trailer voice.
Double crossing. A crime for Christmas. Shock waves. Dangerous games.
Here are the next 4 volumes. Again, same cover style. They did change the cover artists over time, so I do think some are definitely better than others, but they do follow the general style of the other books and the other series at the time, and nice bold color to draw readers' eyes in bookstores. Give the trailer read, of course, so you have
The Last Resort. The Paris Connection.
This one may be my personal favorite.
Buried in Time. Mystery Train.
Again, with the nice matching spines, and again, each one is the background color of the actual book, but that gives them their own identity, and when they're all on a shelf next to each other, they do look rather nice. So even though it's not specifically matching across the board in terms of color, it looks nice and pleasing to the eye, actually. And then with the matching rear covers. So here are the next 4. And again, they kept with the same design idea, but you see here on these 2, they did change up the actual title logo. It's relatively very similar, but they have changed it up, and then they stuck with this style for the next run of books. So you can already see, as with all of these series, they did do minor updates over time to try and keep the books themselves looking modern enough. So trailer read gives you
Best of Enemies. High Survival.
This one was actually the first book that I found in the series. Again, bought it at a school book fair many, many years ago, about the time that I got into the case files. And it has a filmmaking background, so of course I immediately tend to favor those more because I like the idea of things going on during a shoot. And of course this title's been used for several films.
New Year's Evil.
And
Tour of Danger.
Again, with the cool, super colorful matching spines. And you can see here on the later 2 books, they did change the rear covers, which actually makes them look a little bit more generic because they lose the bar across the title of the earlier books. So here are the next 4 with the updated titled cover design for the logo that we saw in the others, which gives us, I have to say, some of these titles, they crack me up so much. I really love how cheesy they can get. So the first volume of these 4 is, of course, entitled
Spies and Lies. Tropic of Fear. Courting Disaster. Hits and Misses.
Got the matching spines for you. And then there's the rear cover jackets. Again, always sticking with the idea that one character or a set of characters is doing something. Meanwhile, the other characters are doing something, and usually nearby, and then they're just going to intersect somehow. So the next 4 volumes include
Evil in Amsterdam, Desperate Measures, Passport to Danger, and Hollywood Horror.
Again, we are keeping with the same updated cover logo, and you have various action poses and things, but I think the age of these books can definitely be told by still the fact that the covers are using a lot of very bright, vivid primary colors, and the whole idea that they're trying to make these look more like regular standard paperback novels. Well, all the bright color, it kind of negates that fact a bit. But yeah, I mean, these are still fun to read, and like I said before, they are getting exceptionally difficult to find, clean volumes to add to your collection. So trying to get these books now, especially the later volumes, starting about halfway, about this point to the end of the run, gets increasingly difficult because, of course, they were printed once or twice, and that was it. They have never been collected or reprinted since the series cancellation. But I will say they did, like this cover in particular for Hollywood Horror looks really nice. So there are certain volumes that don't look as goofy on their covers, and I believe this was a different artist. So again, they did change artists over time. Here's the matching spines for these 4. And there's the rear jackets. And of course, Hollywood Horror still has its original store sticker, which makes me feel very old because this was purchased at a Kmart and their very small book aisle. So I remember doing that with a few Star Wars novels when I was growing up, so that definitely makes me feel very old. Here are the next 4 volumes, which are, of course,
Copper Canyon Conspiracy, Danger Down Under, Dead on Arrival, Target for Terror.
Of course, the titles of these later 3 books already sound like low-budget B films anyway, and actually I swear at least these 2 are titles of probably at least a dozen low-budget thrillers. And here on this, you see that they have changed and updated the cover style again. This book was printed in 1995, so they obviously tried to relaunch the series again to get new readers in, and they changed up the art style. So it's... again, trying to freshen things up and attract new readers and things, but they didn't change the overall size of the books or anything, so they still match the previous volumes. Again, they kept with the matching spines, so they still match on a shelf. And these darker blue ones make them look very much like super thick case files, which I do appreciate. Again, I've always found it interesting how these were printed much more like a regular novel in terms of size and page count, as opposed to the case files and the Nancy Drew files. But I can only presume it's because they had so much more to cover in terms of all these extra characters mashed together. There's the rear covers. So here are the next 4 volumes, entitled
Secrets of the Nile, A Question of Guilt, Islands of Intrigue, Murder on the 4th of July.
I have to say, all these titles are so much fun. Again, keeping with this modernized cover design, I do like the sort of style they've gone with the much more detailed character paintings amidst the locale and events you're going to read about in the novel. They're very colorful without being too colorful, and really, I really like this design. It's probably the best design they had for this series. But of course, as soon as you get to like a particular art design, it usually gets changed for a much more streamlined one, which we will see very shortly with these. Here's the spines, and again, talking about how difficult it is to get these in clean shape, usually the first thing to go on these books are the spines. So it's not like a case file where it's hard to mess up the spine because it's so thin, because these are much more sized like a regular novel and were bought and read by kids and teens who are not going to be as careful with book handling. Usually you find copies, and this one, it's a little bent. It's got some creasing here, but the others are relatively okay. But usually when you find one of the SuperMysteries, the spine is pretty shot or worn and you're not able to read the title. And now you can see exactly what I meant about we're about to see a change in cover art design. So they switched in 1996 with these volumes to a complete changeover in terms of cover art design, using photo montage collages and a brand new logo style that comes from the bottom of the book. And while I wish they would have just stayed with the previous iteration with the actual painted art. These do look pretty good for what they are. Definitely a little bit dated in the design, but the layout is nice, and they used a set of new photo models and kept them relatively. They kept them for all these, so it's not different ones each book, and they look relatively like the actual characters are supposed to look. So they're fine for what they are. I do wish they would have stayed with actual painted artwork, but it could be a lot worse. So, of course, the titles are
High Stakes, Nightmare in New Orleans, Exhibition of Evil, Out of Control.
This is where they changed the spine type design, but since the books are the same size, they're still archway and everything, they pretty much will fit on the shelf next to the others. And again, one wishes they would have kept the spines the same so that they would all match, but they do have a nice unified design. They look quite nice, and they did still keep the background color and thus they have the really colorful spines on the bottom. Here's the rear covers. They look at least a little bit fancier, but it's the same type of idea, just a generic bright color background with the title. And then, of course, again, still got to have the meanwhile. So here are the final 4 volumes of the series. So this brings you up to the very end in 1998. So these have the final cover art design, and apparently there were some other titles in development. It's rumored that they might have already had the other 2 next books in the series in manuscript form, but just decided to cancel the series, again, presumably due to low sales, and this would be the time at which they would also eliminate the case files and the Nancy Drew files. So I guess the idea was to just revamp everything for the turn of the new millennium. So the final 4 books in the series are
At All Costs, Royal Revenge, Operation Titanic,
and the final volume,
Process of Elimination.
So there are your spines, and then the rears in the final cover art design. Again, this book was originally purchased at a Kmart for the low price of $2.99. So I feel old, not in just that it was purchased at a Kmart, but also back when books could be bought new for $2.99. So this, of course, represents the end of the Super Mysteries run, the last of the 36 volumes. And again, I'm really happy I finally was able to complete this series because they are fun reads. They are closer in tone to the darker Case Files and Nancy Drew files, but they do have a bit of feeling of the digest thrown in as well. So maybe it's like 70 to 80% case files feel and like maybe 20-30% digest feel. And of course, while it's super coincidental always that both Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys are going to somehow meet up and their cases will somehow tie together and they'll always be near one another, these are fun reads, and it brings all the characters together, and they have a nice darker tone, and they feel a little bit more realistic because they are closer to the Case Files and Nancy Drew files runs. So if you are a collector, you already know of this series most likely, but if you've never really picked one up and you love the other books, they're worth your time. They're very fun, and it's well worth trying to complete the whole 36-volume run. But again, it's getting increasingly difficult to get all the books. And there have been some other attempts at bringing the characters together. There are now a couple comic books and graphic novels and things, but this was the primary series that everybody thinks of and thus knows for the actual super mystery term. But that's not it for the super mysteries in print form. No, that would be too easy. So for a good deal of time, the Aladdin imprint, while doing the later series runs of Nancy Drew Girl Detective and the Undercover Brothers Hardy Boys series, decided to bring the characters back together and dust off the super mystery term. So seemingly about once a year, they did a super mystery volume bringing the characters together. And they're a little bit thicker and longer in page count than the volumes they were doing at the time, but it's got the same cover style design, the similar one, and also in the same formatting, so it fits on a shelf with the rest of them. So these were done once a year starting in 2007, and we got 6 volumes. Interestingly, these, while they are sort of in line with the cover design of both series of books, none of them, or at least these first 3, don't feature any of the characters at all, which they would change for the final 3 volumes. So the first 3 volumes are entitled
Terror on Tour, Danger Overseas,
and a real classic,
Club Dread.
So they also made really nice matching spines that are actually numbered. And if you've seen any of my other videos, I always really appreciate when publishers do this. I have to say, for a simplistic design, I do like the rear covers. They look nice and they're matching, which again always makes me happy. So here are the final three of this 6-volume run of the attempt at reinvigorating the super mystery idea. Again, these are published once a year. So the sixth and final volume was published in 2012. And as you see here, they did add a pictorial representation of the characters on the front, even though it makes them look super generic. So the titles are
Gold Medal Murder, Bonfire Masquerade,
and of course, now riffing on the Hitchcock title,
Stage Fright.
So this does it really for the printed book form, Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew crossover collaboration books, if you want to call them that. And really, I had just always intended on getting the Super Mysteries and then trying to find the other assorted Wanderer era volumes. But when I realized they had done these as well, and I finally started getting some of the Undercover Brothers books, I started getting these whenever I would find them. And just like those, they are really starting to dry up on the used market. So if you're trying to go for complete collection runs or things like that, or you love the characters no matter what, definitely get some of these books sooner rather than later, because it's even getting more difficult to find some of these books. But this does it for Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew crossovers in books. Again, there have been several comics. There's actually an ongoing comic and graphic novel series where they're together in various ways. But again, that is in a completely different universe that's been established in the comics and various manga that have been made in the past 5 to 10 years. Well, that does it for this particular video. Again, it's actually getting quite difficult to pick up these individual volumes, particularly if you're trying to complete a set of the 36 Super Mysteries titles, which seemingly didn't get as big of a print run of some of the other titles coming out at the same time. So it's gotten quite tricky just tracking them down, and you usually see lots of them on eBay or other auction sites go for quite a bit, because people are really trying to either finish a collection for nostalgia purposes, or they've been trying to do so for some time. And they really are kind of fun reads. Of course, also the earlier books and from the Wanderer era are also extremely difficult to find. I never thought I would find any of the Be Your Own Detective ones, but I'm now only 2 short of having all 6 of those, and I would like to find the other Super Sleuths volume, and again, those are extremely tricky to find due to their age and the fact that they were never reprinted. But anyway, these are fun books, and they're a must if you're trying to complete any Hardy Boys collection, because they slot into different eras. So even if you're just focusing on certain eras, you usually have these tie-in crossover books to deal with as well if you're going for completion. So with that being said, thank you so very much for watching, and as always, hopefully this was informative, and maybe you found some new books to seek out, or books you've been trying to get for a long time, or books that have been gathering dust on the bookshelf without being reread soon enough. So as always, happy book hunting, and thank you so much for watching.